to this very special bonus episode of Real Life Ghost Stories, and in today's bonus episode I am joined by the wonderful Shane Dunphy, the author of The Boy They Tried to Hide, that this week's main episode was based on. So episode number 195 of the podcast is based on Shane's experiences when he was working with a family that were in crisis and needed some intervention, and it is one of the most compelling ghost stories I've ever heard. So if you haven't listened to episode 195, I would recommend that you go and listen to this and then listen to this bonus interview episode with Shane Dunphy. Thank you to everybody who sent in your questions for Shane. As with all of these bonus recorded episodes, the audio is different than normal episodes. It's still completely listenable and absolutely fine, but as it's recorded on different software, the audio is different. You can find Shane's books anywhere that you buy books, really. His name is Shane Dunphy. He is on book number 24, I think. I've not read his other books as yet, but apparently they are very good, very compelling, and very much worth a read. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy it. I was kind of hoping for like some real feisty ones, you know. I was like,
I was expecting some really feisty ones. They're all pretty, but to be honest with you, I don't know what it is about the story, because I remember publishing it and it got a review in the Times, the London Times, and I was expecting this is them to kind of come out with, look, this is great, but it's clearly fiction. But no, most people seem to just kind of accept
sort
that.
of accepted it. And yeah, I wonder what it is about the story that makes people just take it for what it is. Because I think it's very easy, and people love to be a bit nitpicky about supernatural stories, where they're like, yeah, well, explain this, and what about this, and oh, well, you said this, and then this happened, and I wonder what it is about.
No, it has never been nitpicked on any level at all, to be honest. And I mean, it's of all of my books, it and my first one are probably the one that I get asked to talk about the most, And I mean, I think my 24th book is coming out in January. So, I mean, I've written quite a bit, but this one and Wednesday's Child, the first one, are the ones that I'm asked to talk about the most. I think it's just a story that resonates with people.
Yeah, it really does.
Inherently, it is a story about two lonely kids who found each other, And I think that really resonates, and I think people see the humanity in it. Also, I think the fact that the way I approached it when I was in the middle of everything that I describe in the book was I was treating Thomas constantly like a child. Like this was a kid who had gotten mixed up in this case that I was working. And regardless of who he was or what he was mixed up in or what he was, if you want to use that terminology, I wanted to help him. That was my motivation. I believed I was working, I believed right up kind of to the end that I was working with two very, very troubled and unhappy children. And, one was Gregory and one was Thomas. And that remained my motivation kind of up until it became clear that maybe there was something else going on,
I think, we'll get to that point in that point where you realize something was going on in a few minutes. But first, hi Shane, thanks for coming on the show.
I'm delighted to be here. I'm a big fan. I've been listening to quite a few of your episodes, so
thank you very much.
Really happy to be participating in the podcast.
And just to say as well, a lot of listeners to the podcast had heard your story on Spooked. And
it's apparently it is one of their most downloaded episodes, which is quite nice,
I can imagine so. And a lot of people said that it was lovely to then hear the story in more detail and then subsequently to get the chance to ask you questions about it. So thank you. I imagine it could be quite exposing and vulnerable to say, yes, come and ask me whatever questions you want about this story. So
no, not at all. My policy in relation to these things is always, look, I'm completely open. Also, I'm very upfront about the fact that can I swear?
Absolutely.
I haven't got a fucking clue what was going on. Do you know what I mean? And I'm still in say 2 minds. I'm still in possibly 3 minds about what could have happened. But I'm completely open to talk about it. And my attitude is I've got nothing to hide. So, ask away to your heart's content.
So I'm gonna get into the first question. I tried to kind of group the questions in like a theme. So the first couple of questions are all based on Gregory. So question number one came from Max, and Max wanted to know, does Gregory remember Thomas now that he's grown up? And I think that's an interesting question because I think a
Mm.
lot of stories about imaginary friends, the children forget them as they get older. And yes, I think that's what Max is trying to get at there.
Yeah. Hi, Max. To be honest with you, I haven't been in contact with the family since I wrote the book, which was gosh, I think it's more than 10 years now since the book came out. When I did speak to him, however, I can tell you that I wrote the book about 10 years after the events that I describe. So this was happening kind of in the late 1990s that these events were actually taking place. At the time, he had a dim memory of it. So he was aware that something had happened. The family had moved away. I can say that they're no longer living in Ireland. And when I spoke to him, he only had a very, very dim memory of it. It was the mum who I would have had most dealings with when I was kind of chatting, kind of refreshing my memory of events and
Yeah.
kind of, doing, I suppose, my due diligence when I sat down to write the book. And obviously I had to have her permission and the permission of the children involved to do that. So yeah, Gregory had a dim memory of it. He remembered going out into the woods. He remembered his mum being frightened. Didn't actually have any particularly concrete memories of Thomas, interestingly enough. And he didn't remember it as a frightening experience. He remembered his mum being frightened. He didn't find it frightening at all. His memory of the area, his memory of that period of time living in that very rural and isolated part of Ireland, he remembers it as being lonely. And actually, it seems that this experience was an alleviation of that. So he didn't have any bad memories of it, but that said, as I said, he didn't have any particularly detailed memories of what went on either.
So Holly wants to know, how did Gregory handle losing his friend after having him around for so long?
That's a really good question. And yeah, he wasn't all that happy, is my recollection of it. He was never a difficult kid. Okay. His brother, who I was actually working with in the school, was a much feistier, much more kind of in your face kind of guy. Gregory was very, very quiet, very meek. I mean, you did a wonderful telling of my first conversation with Gregory, in which he wouldn't talk to me at all. And I had to do the kind of, shake your head, nod your head exercise to get him to communicate. And when he finally did kind of warm to me a bit and was prepared to talk, he was still a kid who tended to be short sentences. He wasn't a very verbose kind of character. So my awareness of the fact that he wasn't all that happy was more based around the fact that he got even quieter again, that he tended to kind of retreat into himself a little bit more. I would go over to see him kind of in the immediate weeks after it all kind of came to an end. And, he was kind of stuck into his video games and just what wasn't all that inclined. I think he was a bit pissed off with me, to be honest.
You took away his friend.
Yeah. But that said, I mean, obviously, I couldn't continue visiting family forever. So after about a month after the events, I kind of broke off and just said, look, I'm just going to be working with, his brother in the school. And, we did have a conversation sort of just before. I kind of said, look, I'm not going to be hanging around so much in the future. And what he did say was that he was glad his mommy wasn't scared anymore.
Oh, which is really sweet. And he, of
Yeah.
course, for him, Thomas was just a boy.
Yeah.
The
He
end.
never had any concept of him being anything else. And he was just glad, as I said, he understood that his mom wasn't scared anymore. But that said, the whole experience left a bad taste in her mouth, and they moved out of the area about 6 months after that.
So I guess kind of these next two questions, they kind of meld together. So Rachel and Kat wanted to know if it had an impact on his life afterwards. And then Jill wanted to know, what were the follow-up conversations that you had with Gregory, Angus, and Orla, who is the boy's mother, afterwards?
Do you know there actually wasn't that much follow up on it? I kept on calling out more for fear that Gregory would go out into the woods looking for him.
Yeah.
So that was something that we were very aware of, and so just kind of making sure that the security in the house was up to spec, and that he wasn't going to get out. There wasn't an awful lot of talking about it because I think nobody was very clear about what had really happened, as to what we had all experienced. So nobody really wanted to talk about it all that much. Like I said, with Gregory, it was purely. Suddenly he was lonely again. There was nobody to play with because there were no neighbors. There was no kids in the area. Even the travelers that had been camping nearby moved on really fast. I do remember Gregory's mum saying to me that she felt that the woods seemed different.
Okay.
She said they seemed stiller or something. That was I remember we were kind of sitting out in the garden having a cup of tea one evening, and her saying to me, "Do you feel that?" And I said, "Well, what?" And she said, "Do you feel the woods?" And I said, "No, I couldn't sense any difference at all." She said she felt the woods were stiller, that there was almost like something had gone, something was missing. But that was her perception. Of course, she was living there all the time. Do you know what I mean? She was a single mom. She wasn't working, so she was there literally. And except when she went to the shops, she was in the house or in the garden, surrounded by the woods all the time. So she would have had more of an awareness of those kind of very subtle changes that I didn't. I did notice. I mean, don't lose respect for me when I say this, but I'm a birder. Like, I'm very interested in, I'm bird watching and stuff like that.
Absolutely no respect lost here at all. We love birds in this house.
So I would often, when I was out there with Gregory, we'd sit in the back garden and I would pick out bird songs. Do you know what I mean? So what can you hear? I would say I did notice afterwards that there was less birds around. I don't know why that was, but it when I did think about it, it was a little bit quieter. There didn't seem to be as much bird life. But that said, that could have been seasonal as well. So, the way the migrant birds, the warblers and everything arrive in the summer and then they go. And so It could have just been that. I'm very aware of the power of suggestion in all of this. And it causes me to, second guess myself sometimes as to as to the opinions that I'm jumping to. So that was the only real conversation about, do you think it's different now?
It's a funny thing, and I think it's a great Irish ability, which has come from a very dark place, that when these things happen, whether they're strange, wonderful, whatever, it is very common for people to just go, "We're not going to talk about this anymore."
Oh yeah, it was very much that. It was very much that, because I mean, like, Gregory's mum was not a stupid woman by any stretch of the imagination. She'd had a tough enough life. Do you know what I mean? But she was strong, and she was coping. She was coping really well. I mean, there were two really, really well-rounded little boys. And yet then she'd had this very, very traumatic experience with all of this. I'm an academic. I'm a writer. I'd had many years working in child protection and had seen all kinds of things, and then there was the school principal who'd been with me when we found Gregory. And I mean, he was also an incredibly down-to-earth guy who'd lived in the area all of his life. And he didn't want to talk about it afterwards. Would not talk about it afterwards. I remember afterwards, when we were standing outside the house after Gregory had been delivered back, and he and I just looked at each other, and I said to him, "What the fuck did you think of that?" And he said, "We found the boy."
Oh, the end. It's over with. We found him.
Finished. We found the boy. And that was, he did not want to talk about it anymore after that either. And has not to this day. Has not to this day. So, yeah, as you're right, it is possibly just part of the Irish character that, okay, that's over. Let's move on, you know.
So James wanted to know, have you had any ghostly experiences before or since this one? And did this experience turn you from a skeptic to a believer?
Child protection work is funny because to do it well, you have to enter into the world of the children that you're working with. And I've always said that I believe that this is why I had this experience with Thomas. That I think that this is my best summing up of what happened. I think that Gregory had tuned into something, some frequency that was in that area as a result of something awful that had happened in the past. And he had tuned into that. Because of the fact that they were such a close-knit family, I think his mum tuned into it.
Mm.
And then I think because of the fact that I do the work that I do, and the only tool that's important when you're doing child protection work is your capacity to form a relationship with the kids that you're working with. I think that I tuned into it as well, you know. And obviously then, as I said, my friend, the school principal who joined us, you know, he'd been working with kids his entire life as well, his entire adult life. So he somehow was able to have that experience too. As a result of this, a couple of other jobs that I've done did involve certain elements of, if you want to call it supernatural, I don't even know what to call it. A case that I worked relatively early in my career, there was two little boys who had been they had been expelled from their preschool. Now, you can imagine what the behavior must have been like to be kicked out of the preschool. You know, they'd been expelled from the preschool. So I was asked to go visit the family. It was supposed to be a very, very short-term job, find out what was going on, and ideally get them placed somewhere else. So when I went along, I discovered that they were the sons of a man who had been he'd been shot by gangsters. He was a criminal, and he'd been shot by some of his colleagues when some deal he was involved in had gone wrong. Their mum had the house like a shrine to him. There was pictures of him all over the place. She still laid a place for him at the dinner table, and had never actually told the two boys that he was dead. They didn't know that their father was dead. And they informed me on my first visit that the reason that they were behaving the way they had been in the creche was because their daddy had told them to. The daddy had told them to behave like this. I thought, that's weird. I said, so you're talking to daddy? And said, oh yeah. And I said, okay. And you know, where are you meeting him? And they explained to me that they went down to the back of the garden, and there was this the garden kind of rose a little bit at the back, and there was kind of like a raised ditch kind of a thing. And they would go there and kind of climb down behind it. And there was like almost like kind of an old, like dry riverbed kind of a thing. And they would go down there, and this is where they would meet daddy. So I thought, again, my initial thought was that there's some guy there that they're seeing or whatever. Yeah. They were at risk. So I asked them, I put them in separate rooms, and I gave them paper and pencils, and I asked them to draw for me a picture of their daddy, when, you know, this person that they were seeing when they went down behind the raised ditch. And each of them independently drew exactly the same thing, which the only way I can describe it, actually, I write about this in one of my books, and I tried to reproduce the picture. As close as I could describe it, it's like the face in Edvard Munch's Scream. It's this kind of skull-like thing that they drew. And I continued to visit the house, and weird stuff did happen when I was there. At one stage, I remember the room that we were in, and this was summer, and it was a bright day outside. But I remember the room we were in getting incredibly dark, and I couldn't explain it because the window was there, the curtains were open, but the room itself seemed to get dark, and it seemed to get very, very cold. And on another occasion, and this is when I was actually trying to talk to the boys about the fact that, you know, sometimes, you know, again, I was trying to kind of work under the assumption that, you know, that they believed what they were telling me. So I was kind of trying to appeal to that, saying that, you know, sometimes grown-ups can make mistakes and tell us to do things that aren't necessarily right. And, you know, hurting other kids in school is not a good thing. And it was as I was having this conversation, the room starts to get dark and bitterly cold. On another occasion that I was there, the electricity went out and I went into the utility room to find the trip switch. And of course, you have to climb up on a chair to do that. And as I was doing this, I could hear this scratching sound at the window, as if it was a tree branches that were scratching and scraping really loudly at the window. And just as I hit the trip switch, the chair was kicked out from underneath me. And I literally fell and hit my head. And when I kind of got up, I went to try and open the door and I couldn't open it. And the sound of the scratching was getting louder and louder and louder. And I'm starting to panic. And I was banging on the door with both fists. And the next thing, the mom arrives and just opens the door. She said, "What's wrong with you?" I said, "I couldn't get the door open." And then I turn on her, you know. I said, "Look, I'm here trying to fucking help you." I said, "And you're pulling the fucking chair out from under me." I said, "I really hurt myself." And she said, "You can ask the boys. I've been in the room with them the entire time." So I went out into the back just to get some air because the whole house suddenly started to feel like it was closing in on me. And I stood there and I looked over at the window of the utility room, looking for what tree it was that had been scratching on the window while I was in there. There wasn't a tree within 20 feet of the window. So whatever was making that sound to this day, I don't know. But that experience pissed me off to such a degree. I decided enough is enough. And I said to the mom, "We're taking the boys to their father's grave." And it took some persuading, but she eventually agreed. And we took them to the grave. And after we did that, all the weird stuff in the house stopped. All the weird stuff stopped, you know? So I have no idea. I mean, you and I were chatting there just before we started recording about, you know, Danny Robbins and some of those poltergeist stories, which seem to in some way be linked to unhappiness in children. I wondered if the boys were in some way causing some of this stuff to happen themselves. I don't know. The other weird experience that I had was I was working in a residential childcare unit. And it was an old mansion house. And I was told when I started working there that it had a ghost, whom they called the Red Lady. And several of the staff had seen her. And they said to me that they always saw her after there had been some really, really, really intense emotional occurrence in the house. You know, one of the kids getting upset or one of the kids acting out or something really, really stressful happening. And I ended up thinking, at least, that I saw her on two occasions. One was after one of the kids that I was working with. His father had been brought to court for doing some really horrible things to his children. And the father was sentenced, but during the sentencing, he kind of stood up in court and was profusely apologizing to his son for what had happened, what he had done. And of course, as you can imagine, the son got very, very upset. And so we'd had a really rough night with him. And I remember I was quite rightly, when you were putting kids to bed in residential care, you can't go into you go in, you put them to bed, and then if you're waiting for them to fall asleep or whatever, you don't wait in the room. You sit in the doorway, because that way there can be no allegations made and you're being completely safe. So I was sitting in the doorway. It was very, very late at this stage. He hadn't gone to sleep for hours and hours and hours. It was about 1:30, maybe 2 a.m. And I was sitting there starting to nod off. And suddenly I caught this flash of red kind of in my peripheral vision going past. And then I heard footsteps in the living room, and I thought, oh, it must be one of the other kids up having a nightmare or whatever. So I got up and went into the living room. And for just a moment, I caught the outline of this female figure standing in the window. And I realized as I looked that, she was wearing a kind of a red dress that looked like kind of like 1920s style. And she turned around and I just caught a glimpse for a second, and then it was like she was gone. And it's like you get if you've been looking at light and then you switch the lights off, you can still see the imprint of the, I don't know what that's called, but it was like that. It was like that there was that kind of residue kind of in my eyes. And I said it to one of the other staff, got up at that point, and I was saying it to her, I said, I think I've just seen the Red Lady. And she just said, yeah, I'm not surprised.
And that kind of ties into, so Alice also asked, she said, Shane must have met and worked with many troubled kids in his time. What does he think of the idea that young people's restless energy can somehow create paranormal activity, such as in the Enfield haunting? So I guess that kind of ties into that. I mean...
Yeah. I mean, I am not going to pretend to be an expert on any of this. I have had, working with kids, I've had some weird experiences. I think that children are very open. Children believe in magic completely. We train them to, if you think about it. I mean, Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, the Tooth Fairy, all of these things. We bring our kids up to believe in this, and then, they reach adolescence and we crush all of that, or we try to, But kids are open. So when you're working with them, you've got to be open too. So I think that as I said, that frequency that they're tuned into, if you tune into that yourself, you're leaving yourself open. And like I said, it could be the power of suggestion. It could be, like I always say, you walk into a house and you're told it's haunted. That immediately makes you more accepting, I suppose, of what you might see or encounter there. At the same time, I was emotionally exhausted when I saw the Red Lady. It was 2:00 in the morning. I was half asleep. I could have dreamed the whole thing.
Yeah.
All the stuff that happened in that house with those two little boys, it could probably all be explained scientifically or through weather phenomena or whatever. The Thomas story, a little bit harder to explain, particularly seeing as there were so many independent witnesses, like the travelers, for example, like who had no connection with this family and who I'd never met before. That's harder, but I'm still perfectly open to being told like that there's a very easy, if someone can come up with a very easy explanation for what happened, I would be delighted to hear it. I'm in no way precious about the fact that, this is my ghost. It's a strange story is the way I look at it, that as I said, seems to resonate very strongly with people.
Yeah, it definitely does. And Devin wrote in and said, so you mentioned in the story that the locals were seeing childlike figures in the forest. So there's the bit where you talked about like people had reported hearing a child crying. You had an experience prior to this of hearing a child crying in the forest, which I didn't include in my story. Did they automatically think that it was a child's spirit, or did they think it was someone or something else? And wouldn't the boy, so Gregory and Angus's mother, also have heard these stories about a child or the ghost of a child in the woods?
Gregory and Angus's mum, they were new to the area. They were not locals. Okay. I didn't put that in to the book purely because we were every nonfiction book that I write, the lawyers go through it with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that
any identifying factors need to be removed.
Exactly, all of those things. I mean, the books are gone through and gone through and gone through. You could be talking 7, 8, 9 drafts by the time it's finished, just to make sure everybody is protected. They were actually new to the area. They weren't living there very long when all of this happened. So no, they had no comprehension of anything like that. The locals, I do remember again talking to my boss, the principal, about when we'd been hiking together and we heard, or I heard, the sound of what I thought was a baby crying. I said this to the principal, and his immediate reaction was, sure, looks probably just a fox or some animal in the woods. Some birds can make very strange calls, particularly like a jay.
Yeah,
it's kind of a crow. Sounds like somebody screaming if you hear it, under the right circumstances. So it's very easy to explain those kind of things away. But no, because of the fact that there was this tradition that there was a certain area in the woods which was haunted, and there were, these two stories, one of which, both of which you told in your telling, the one about the girl who'd become impregnated by her father, and he kept her, locked up out in the woods or whatever to hide her away. I don't believe. I mean, I looked into that, and I don't believe that actually happened. I think that was, just a folk tale, really. However, the other story, the story about the mum possibly murdering her child and, keeping her child a secret, that I do very much believe. And I actually was very grateful that you kind of gave an explanation at the end of the last podcast just about Ireland's social history.
Yeah.
And in the 1980s, the mother and baby homes and the Magdalen laundries in Ireland were still in full swing.
And I think a lot of people don't really fully comprehend what that actually meant for Irish society and what that meant for women who had children out of wedlock and all of that stuff. And and I think you were so right. So in the book you talked about how is it possible this story of the incestuous father, etc., grew up out of guilt from a society who didn't help Winifred Tobin and who therefore needed a big bad villain to blame.
Oh yeah, and I absolutely do believe that that's what happened. The case in Ireland that actually changed our attitude towards child protection and towards the protection of women was the Kilkenny incest case, which took place in the early 1990s. And it's funny because the Winifred Tobin story reminds me of it so much. I mean, this was a case of a girl who had actually been impregnated by her father and had been abused atrociously for her entire life. And when she finally ran away because she believed that her father was going to start harming her child, and she ended up going to a refuge here in Waterford. When they finally started to look into the case, it came to light that literally everyone in the local community knew what was going on. But not only that, a huge number of professionals knew what was going on and had done absolutely nothing to help. And what it did was it shone a light on good, holy Catholic Ireland, the land of a thousand welcomes, that actually showed that, in fact, communities could be incredibly harsh on people who they believed were, let's just say, casting a light on the morality of Irish people that they didn't really like. And it leaves a really bad taste in my mouth. But I think Winifred Tobin was another victim of that, as very possibly was Thomas.
Yeah. And I it's so difficult to explain to people how it would have been at the time preferable to just hide that child than it would be for the clergy at the time or the church in the area to find out that that child was born out of wedlock, because you ran the risk of being locked up. You ran the risk of the child being taken away from you.
Yeah, I mean, Mary McAleese described the industrial schools and the Magdalen laundries as Ireland's Holocaust.
Yeah.
I mean, we are talking about thousands of women and children, the vast majority from the poorer classes in Ireland, being locked away, and with no legal right to do so. And yet, if they ran away, the police would come and bring them back. And these women were I mean, the levels of institutional abuse are shocking. Absolutely shocking. And the children would be taken away and often illegally sold into foreign adoptions.
I know, which still, when I think about it to this day, it blows my mind.
And then, of course, we have the mother and baby home in the west of Ireland, in which they found mass graves, which we still haven't, of children, which we still haven't been given a proper explanation as to whether those were deaths by natural causes, or whether we're talking about children being murdered or what, we don't know. But yeah, a very, very, very dark period in Ireland's history. And it makes perfect sense to me that somebody like Winifred Tobin would have hidden her child and tried to carry on her life as if nothing had happened, because it was preferable to effectively being put in what was really a forced labor prison for the rest of your life, in which your child would be taken away and sold to some wealthy American or Canadian family, and you'd never see them again. So people did what they had to do. And I think that Winifred Tobin, for all of the fact that she clearly had some mental health issues which weren't being looked after, was really just trying to do her best.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. She really was trying to do her best for her little boy.
Yeah. And obviously then there's the whole mental health issue. I mean, we've had quite a number of cases in Ireland as well within the last kind of 15 years of parents, as a result of depression and desperation, killing their children. And I'm not initially, I remember, because I covered quite a few of those stories as a journalist, and initially there was an awful lot of sympathy for the people that had perpetrated those crimes. I remember over time starting to feel less sympathetic about it, and actually just saying, look, we need to have a fucking conversation about mental health in Ireland, and particularly about depression, and about the services that are available.
Or not available.
Or not available, which is actually more the case. I mean, the two-tier health system, in Ireland, if you've got private health insurance, there's still a waiting list, but you'll be seen within a month or so, which, if you've got extreme depression, is still a really long fucking time. But I mean, if you're public and you're waiting to see a psychiatrist, you could be waiting a year, 18 months, even longer.
Yeah, 2 years is not uncommon,
No, it's not. And the child and adolescent health facilities are even worse. It beggars belief. And in the 1980s, to open up about the fact that you were depressed, you'd be laughed at. People didn't have depression. You'd say, give yourself a kick up the arse and just get on with it. You'll be fine.
Yeah, get on with it. You'll be fine. And also a woman to say, I was violently abused by this man, the father of this child, and I have this child out of wedlock. Nobody's going to listen to her. People are going to say, well,
exactly. And I mean,
you had a child out of wedlock, so that's the big.
red flag. How many families in the 1980s, where there would have been domestic violence, which again the neighbors probably would have been aware of, but nobody would have said a word, because you don't interfere with what was going on behind the curtains of a family home.
You never said anything. It was not your business.
So the story is completely believable. And I've thought about it a lot. And I mean, Father Senan, when we talked about it, I mean, he was carrying a lot of guilt over that, and had been carrying it for quite a number of years, that maybe he should have stepped in or done something different. And again, I mean, look, I'm no fan of the church. I've written a lot about that, and I'm open about the fact I'm a survivor of clerical abuse myself. But I didn't think he was a bad guy. I think that he had tried to help the family. He had gone to the police. Nobody wanted to know, because he was just this shit kicker living out in the woods, who everybody thought was just a bit strange,
Yeah.
And it's just a really, really tragic story.
And I think it's like you said, it's entirely believable. When I was reading your story of Winifred Tobin, I was like, okay.
Yeah,
actually,
within the context of Ireland at that time, it was one story of thousands. Just
every town would have had a Winifred Tobin. You know,
100%. Yeah.
Today's episode is sponsored by ZocDoc. So you're trying to find a cause for your symptoms. For me, it was excessive hair loss, and you end up stumbling down a TikTok rabbit hole full of questionable advice from so-called experts. But there are better ways to get the answers that you want and the care you deserve from trusted professionals and not random people on the internet. ZocDoc helps you to find expert doctors and medical professionals that specialise in the care you need and deliver the type of experience you want. ZocDoc is the only free app that lets you find and book doctors who are patient reviewed, take your insurance, are available when you need them, and treat almost every condition under the sun. No more doctor roulette or scouring the internet for questionable reviews. With ZocDoc, you have a trusted guide to connect you to your favourite doctor you haven't met yet. Millions of people use ZocDoc's free app to find and book a doctor in their neighbourhood who is patient reviewed and fits their needs and schedule just right. Go to ZocDoc.com/ghost and download the ZocDoc app for free. Then find and book a top-rated doctor today. Many are available within 24 hours. That's ZocDoc.com/ghost. ZocDoc.com/ghost. We could have talked about, I think, Ireland's dark past there for the next 3 hours.
Yeah, it's a long and sordid story. You know,
really
unfortunately, you could go right back to Celtic times. I mean, one of the first feudal laws that was passed in Ireland was actually about making it illegal for members of religious orders to have sex with children. I mean, it goes that far back. We're talking about like the 8th, 9th century. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, don't get me started. Maybe another show.
maybe another podcast.
Exactly. Ireland's dark past.
So to bring it back to the paranormal a little bit, Katie and Trisha both had questions about the baby monitor recording, and so Katie wanted to know, do you have a copy of the recording that people can hear? And Trisha wanted to know how the mum taped the baby, like what happened in that period.
All right, I do not have a copy of the tape, and I asked for it when I was writing the book, and she laughed at me and said that had been burned ages ago along with her. We don't want to remember any of this. So no, that's long gone. I wish I did have a copy of it. What happened was, literally, I had said to her, you know, the best way to try and catch this kid if he's trying to sneak out, stick a baby monitor in the room. It's low tech. Again, you got to remember, this is the late 1990s. Okay, so I mean, mobile phones were in their infancy at this time. You know, there's no Siri, the kind of technology, or Alexa or anything like that. The kind of technology that we have now was not a thing of that time. So your standard baby monitor, not the ones that have little video screens, but just your, like a little walkie-talkie that you plug into the wall, one upstairs, one downstairs. So said that you can listen out for it, you know, just have it plugged in near you when you're sitting downstairs. So that's what she had done. And she, you know, said to me that she was just sitting there, she was watching TV, and the next thing she could hear, she said it sounded like he was talking to himself. But she said she turned up the volume on the baby monitor, and suddenly she realized that what she was hearing were what sounded like two distinct voices. Now, many skeptics have said to me, could it have been him putting on a different voice? Yeah, I mean, I guess it could. It didn't sound like him. If he was doing it, he was doing a very good performance. And it did sound very much like two different voices, you know? But what she did was, when she heard that, she wanted me to hear it. So she went and got, you know, your old-fashioned, you know, cassette player, and literally, you know, stuck in a tape, pressed play and record, and held it up to the baby monitor. And that's how she recorded it. So, I mean, it wasn't massively good quality. And I remember she had to turn the volume right up full for us to be able to hear properly what was going on. But you could hear the conversation, and you could hear what sounded like two distinct voices.
So genuinely, when I got to that part of the story, like I was gripped by that point. I was like, oh my God, how did you feel in that moment?
I'm not going to lie, it gave me the chills when I heard it. Um, I'm still at this stage, though. Like, I'm not jumping to the conclusion at this point that we're dealing with a ghost or anything like that. I'm miles away from that at this stage. What I'm thinking is that there is some kid who's possibly living homeless out in the woods, and this would not be the first time I've come across kids living homeless. I remember walking across Dublin City one evening from the conferences that I was at over to Busáras, and stopping and talking to 8 homeless young people living on the streets of Dublin. Do you know what I mean? So, living in the woods wouldn't have surprised me. Similarly, the whole thing with him saying that he liked the A-Team and that he had a specky computer. Not very long in that same area of Ireland, not very long beforehand, I had worked with a family who were living as if they were living in the 19th century. They'd gotten rid of all technology, literally had a pump to pump water in the kitchen. The father went mad when I stuck on the radio in my car when it was parked outside the house, because he didn't want any intrusion from the modern world. So that even didn't have me thinking that anything particularly weird was going on at that stage. I'm still thinking that this is a kid who has somehow broken into the child's room.
Yeah.
And I'm also worried, why does he want him to go out into the woods? And I'm still thinking, could this kid be living with some cult or some commune that are in the woods somewhere?
Yeah.
Why do they want a child? You got to remember, I've dealt with pedophile rings, I've dealt with trafficking rings. All of this stuff is what's coming to my head. I'm not thinking anything supernatural at this stage. I am purely believing that we've got 2 children who are really seriously at risk.
Yeah, and I have to say, as somebody who spent much of their career in safeguarding as well, I would be of the same mindset.
Yeah.
Like, up until the point I see this kid and I realize he's see-through. You know what I mean? I'm in the same mindset. I'm thinking, right, there's a possibly older kid coming into this little kid's bedroom.
Yeah.
What is going on? What is the lure? Why are they going out into the woods? Who is out in the woods? So I totally get having that feeling. And I just from a personal perspective, like, did you have a point in this story where you thought, shit, I don't think this is a real boy. I think this might be a ghost or whatever it is.
I started to think that it was something other. That's the best word that I can use to describe it. Only really towards the very end. Too much stuff was starting to indicate that this was, but you got to remember, then you're still dealing with physical symptoms. I mean, there's rocks being thrown through windows.
Yeah, footsteps or footprints. Yeah.
I mean, and the voice on the tape recorder. I mean, how many episodes of Most Haunted have you watched, or any of these, where they've got nothing and they've got all the equipment, and they're kind of walking through the house. What's that? Is that something? Oh, no, it's not. And they just keep going, and there's nothing there. And yet here we have all of this physical evidence, and all of that was still making me think. But it was really, to be honest with you, there was 2 things. Number one, when I had visited Father Senan in the old folks' home, and I was driving out, and I was coming down, and I mean, we had walked through the woods, he and I. Now, it was a different part of the woods, but we'd walked through the woods. We'd had the conversation, and I'm driving out, and I absolutely swear that there was a little boy standing on the corner, just looking at me. And I saw him as clear as day. Now, there was nothing see-through about him. He looked like a boy, but just in that corner, he looked like he didn't belong there. Do you know what I mean? So I stopped and I went back. Not a sign of him, no footsteps or anything there. But that kind of freaked me out a bit. But then it was at the very end when we found Gregory in the woods, and I looked over, and there he was, and that awful crying, and it wasn't him. His lips weren't moving.
It gives me the heebie-jeebies.
And then that thing, and I've never seen anything like it. I've never seen it in a movie. I've never seen it in anything else. But genuinely, it looked like there was a rope tied around his waist, and something pulled it, and it's giving me, I'm getting a bit freaked out now remembering it, but it was like he just shot backwards. And I even saw him, kind of his legs went out from under him and he shot backwards through the trees. But then again, if I think about that, okay, was I under a lot of stress? Yeah. Was I a bit freaked out by what was going on? Yes, I certainly was. Was I buying into a fantasy that this little boy was having? And, I'd spent so much time with that family. I don't know. It's what I think I saw.
Yeah.
I was genuinely scared shitless in that moment. I still tried to treat him like a kid. I was still trying to talk to him to just say, look, do you need help? What do you need? What can we do? And, I remember actually when I was doing the Spooked podcast, I think that the lady who interviewed me for that actually said, do you think that it was because you were still treating him like a kid that he went away? That maybe for the first time somebody had actually seen him and kind of reached out to him with kindness, that maybe that's all he wanted. Maybe that's all that it took.
Just a bit of recognition. Just
a little bit of recognition. Yeah, look, I'm here. I see you. I see you are in pain. I want to help. I don't know. I don't. There are no answers. This is the
frustrating thing, isn't it?
It is the frustrating thing. I haven't got a clue. This is what I said to you at the very beginning. Actually, I still don't know what happened.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a good way to look at it, because if you go, well, it was definitely 100% a ghost, then you leave yourself completely closed to any other options.
Yeah.
Whereas if you go, actually, something really strange happened and I don't know what it was.
Yeah. I mean, I remember at one stage when I was doing actually a kind of a related, I did a thing on kind of cryptozoology for the documentary on RT Radio 1, where I went monster hunting, and ended up getting this really bizarre recording of an unknown creature. And I remember bringing it to a zoologist to listen to kind of say, look, what is this? Have you ever heard anything like this? And actually, he had heard the Spooked story, and he was talking to me about it. And he said to me, he said that those woods, he said, was there this particular type of, don't ask me what kind, but this particular type of moss growing there. And he showed me this picture. And he said, apparently when this particular moss reacts with a certain type of moisture at a certain temperature, it can release these gases which can cause, in extreme circumstances, hallucinations. He said, is it possible maybe that you would come or encounter this? And I said, well, it's absolutely possible. I said, I don't know. I've never looked that closely at a bit of moss to be able to tell you. But I said, is it likely that I would have seen it and that the people that I was with would have seen exactly the same thing? And then he said, well, are you sure you saw exactly the same thing? Because he was saying that, with the fact that, that we knew that that Gregory had an imaginary friend. He said, did I describe in detail to the principal of the school what I had seen to make sure that he had seen exactly the same thing? He said, the two of you seeing a boy when you knew he was supposed to be with a boy isn't that unusual. And then both of us hearing a child crying when that's what everybody says that they hear in the woods. He said he reckoned maybe that's what was going on. It's a theory. I certainly didn't feel stoned.
Well, it's a theory, but like you said, generally with hallucinogenics, everybody doesn't hallucinate the same thing.
Exactly, yeah. But he was saying the power of suggestion might have actually caused us to hallucinate something similar, but then we didn't actually we didn't describe it in detail to one another. And he said, why was the boy, the other thing that he thought indicated that might have been it was that Gregory was asleep. in the middle of the day.
Yes, and you said that pointedly in the book, that bizarrely he was fast asleep
Yeah.
leaning against the wall, and that
Which
shocked both of you. Yeah.
I couldn't, why was this? And he came awake. He was groggy. He was certainly groggy.
So he had been actually asleep.
He had been asleep. Yeah, he was groggy, and actually he remained, like, I picked him up and was carrying him over my shoulder, and he remained asleep for, a good 10 minutes before he kind of came back around again. So as I said, this zoologist that I talked to reckons that might have been what happened. As I said, it's a theory. I'm open to it. I'm not precious or attached to it. I'm open to any ideas that come up, and fascinated by them, to be honest.
Do you know what? To be honest, if I was somebody who was inclined towards hallucinogenics, I'd be absolutely livid right now, because if people were wasting money on LSD when really they could be just out in the woods sniffing some moss.
No, he said it has to be it's got to do with, I think peat is an element of it, something I can't remember. He explained it all to me in detail. Now he said it has to be the very specific circumstances for this to occur, but he just said it was a puzzle and he was trying to work it out. He was he was being very, he was kind of almost joking, kind of, it's unlikely that is what happened, but it could have.
But these things do happen sometimes.
Things do happen. So yeah, great. I was interested to hear his idea.
So Kyra wanted to know, could it be some sort of fae or sprite type creature, considering it left footprints and was seen by multiple people and seemingly had the strength to open a locked window? I'd imagine a ghost wouldn't really need to climb up the wall either. Now, I love a bit of fairy lore, so I'm all for this answer. It's definitely the fae.
Yeah, certainly there were a couple of fairy rings and fairy mounds in the area. I'm fascinated by all of that stuff as well. Possibly, yeah. I certainly, again, the climbing up the drain pipe thing. I remember that vividly, and the movement or the motion when he went up the drain pipe, it didn't even look like climbing. It looked more like floating. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, you said that in the book. Yeah,
it wasn't that herky-jerky movement of somebody going hand over hand up a drain pipe. It looked more like just levitation almost from where I was sitting. And I also remember that the shape was black, as it went up. It didn't look like a person. Actually, somebody said to me at one stage, like, did I think it might have been a pine marten or one of those, tree dwelling mammals that we have in Ireland. That's the first time anybody has suggested it might be the fae or a fairy creature, and it's not one that I had considered. I'd have to look into that some more. I don't know enough about them to be able to match up characteristics in terms of behavior. I have done some research on changelings, again, from a child protection perspective. Sorry, what's the name of the listener who?
Kyra.
Is Kyra suggesting that Thomas wanted to kind of steal Gregory and bring him back to
well, do you know what scared the living bejesus out of me in your story, and I didn't include it in the podcast, was when you were talking to the little traveling boy and he was saying that he got up in the middle of the night and went out to Thomas and he kept beckoning him into the woods, and then the further he went, Thomas would disappear and reappear further away.
Yeah.
And like trying to lure him into the woods. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, that was I do remember thinking that the version of Thomas that the travelers saw was certainly a bit more sinister than the one that Gregory was dealing with, so actually, I hadn't made that correlation. Maybe Kyra's onto something there. Yeah, I hadn't. It's the first time I've really thought about it. I'll have to look into that a bit more closely. It's a very good suggestion. Thank you, Kyra.
So Camille wants to know, were the woods thoroughly searched for hidden caves or something of that nature that someone could have lived in and have died later?
Yes. Around the time that Father Sennen originally went to the police, there was a cursory search done to see if there was a, he insisted. I can't remember whether he put it into the book or not, but there was a cursory
Yes, he did,
search
I think.
done. Yeah. Yeah, there was a cursory search done to see if there was any kind of a body or anything like that. Afterwards, myself and the principal did do, we did quite a few hikes around that area looking to see, again, because I still couldn't give up the idea that there might be a child living rough. Even though there was nobody reported missing in the area, there was nothing like that. But we did search the woods pretty thoroughly, and George was a very accomplished woodsman and knew the area very, very well. And no, there was no shelters or even roughly built things that that anybody could have used. That old ruin of the hut, which was very, very deep in the woods. I mean, it didn't have a roof on it or anything like that.
Yeah.
And on the first occasion that I described at the start of the book when we were there, I went back again after the events. My dog still wouldn't go anywhere near it. But it was completely overgrown inside. Like, you couldn't have gotten in to use it as a shelter. So no, there was no evidence that we could see of anywhere that anybody could have been living.
And the very last question, which I think we've sort of answered previously, came from Kat, and she wanted to know why didn't anybody put up any kind of CCTV or video surveillance up around the house when there were seemingly 2 children in jeopardy? But I imagine it's the 90s in Ireland, in rural Ireland, and it was very expensive.
That is exactly the answer. Yeah, you're talking about a single mum living on the lone parents allowance in rural Ireland. The height of technology that could be afforded was the baby monitors, and that was it. The idea of putting up CCTV cameras. You got to remember, the guards were involved, but they were viewing this case purely as a runaway.
Yeah.
The fact that there was no reports of missing children in the area, and that all that they had really in terms of witness was this little boy. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they, in fairness, they gave it as much time as they probably believed was reasonable. So I don't think that we can say that it wasn't taken, or that the matter was being kind of brushed aside. It was just, what are they going to do with this? Other than what we've already got. Yeah, the idea that CCTV cameras were not in a private home was just not something that people would have done back then. You can pick them up in Lidl now for
nothing.
For nothing, yeah. But back then that would have been totally off the charts. Yeah, nobody would have done it.
Shane, that was the final question. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me on. It was an absolute pleasure. And
do you have anything that you desperately would like to plug while you're here?
No, my last book, which came out in January, is called The Help Desk. It's published by Hachette Books, and it is kind of a standalone psychological thriller about a lawyer who is working on the biggest deal of his career. And one night he's working late in the office and loses a file on the cloud, and rings the IT help desk, and a very pleasant woman answers, and they spend a couple of hours trying to find the file, and they finally do, and they strike up a bit of a relationship. But he's married and he's not really able to pursue it, so he ends up having to kind of fob her off. And shortly after that, things start to go badly wrong for him. Other files go missing. Porn starts showing up on the hard drive of his work laptop, and all kinds of things start to go wrong, not just in his life, but in his wife's life as well. Is it the woman on the help desk or not? Because the book is told from 3 different points of view, and every single one of them are unreliable narrators.
We love an unreliable narrator.
Yeah, exactly. Don't we all? Yeah. So that's The Help Desk. So that's out at the moment. Next book, I have a couple of books coming out in January. But other than that, no. Just thanks everybody for the interest. It makes me very happy, actually, that this story kind of continues to find new listeners and new interest. And I actually think, one of the things that I wanted to do with my books about child protection was kind of shine a light on the lives of people who normally are not celebrated.
Yeah.
You know, and the fact that so many people have heard about Thomas and so many people are interested in him and talking about him, I'm so happy about that, because I think that's probably what he needed.
Yeah.
You know, he's kind of famous now, so it's nice, you know.
Can I just say as well that one of your short stories was, or one of your stories was turned into a short film that was nominated for an IFTA recently?
That's right. Yeah. So Wednesday's Child, which was my first book, I mean, it was very successful. Went to #1 on the bestseller lists in Ireland. Was in the top 5 in the London Times bestseller list as well. But it's the first chapter of Wednesday's Child has been turned into a short film by Caroline Harvey and Charlie Bailey, both of whom would be well known to Irish viewers because they're both in the soap Fair City, which is kind of Ireland's answer to EastEnders. It's literally the story of a social worker on her first day going to do a home visit, and it all goes horribly wrong. You know, it's kind of a dark film. Like, it's not easy viewing, but it's incredibly realistic. I mean, they didn't pull any punches, and it has been outlandishly successful. I mean, we won Best Irish Short at the Galway Film Fleadh. We've been to loads of different festivals and won loads of stuff, and we got nominated for an Irish Film and Television Award, which was great. You know, so it's just really humbling again that book, which literally I wrote thinking I'd sell 5 copies to a few family and friends, and it's still as well. Kind of those stories are still attracting interest. So it's wonderful.
Congratulations, and it was amazing to talk to you, and thank you so much. You're after giving up like an hour and a half of your time to come on and talk to me, and I really appreciate it.
Oh no, you're more than welcome. As I said, I'm just really, really pleased that people are interested in the story, and as I said, big fan of the podcast anyway, so delighted to be involved.
Thank you so much, and everybody listening, you can pick up The Boy They Tried to Hide pretty much anywhere. On big online retailers, you can get it anywhere really.
Yeah, it's pretty widely available. Yeah. So, thank you very much.